My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 72 years old, and my own son tried to have me declared incompetent, so he could throw me into a nursing home and steal my inheritance. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on him in that cold lawyer's office, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone. The air in David Chin's office was so thick you could have carved it with a knife. For 40 years, this room, with its rich mahogany desk and the comforting scent of old books and leather, had been a place of sanctuary for my family. It was here that my late husband, Robert, and I signed the papers for this very house. It was here we planned for our son Mark's college fund. And it was here, after Robert's funeral, that I found quiet counsel and a steady hand to guide me through the fog of grief. But today there was no comfort. There was only the low hum of the air conditioner and the frantic beating of a heart I was forcing to remain calm. My own heart was a block of ice in my chest, cold, steady, and unmoving. It had to be. The door opened and they didn't walk in. They breezed in, bringing a chill with them that had nothing to do with the thermostat. My son Mark and his wife Tiffany. The smug satisfaction on their faces was a physical blow. Tiffany's smile was as bright and fake as a $3 bill. She was wearing a new dress, one I was sure was bought in anticipation of this day. "Mom," she chirped, her voice dripping with a sweetness so false it could make your teeth ache. "You made it. We were so worried you'd forget." I didn't answer. I just watched them as they took the two plush leather seats opposite me and David. Mark, my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the teenager whose heartbreaks I mended with ice cream and patience, wouldn't meet my eyes. He was busy straightening his tie, adjusting his cuffs, doing anything to avoid looking at the woman who gave him life. The woman he was about to discard like an old appliance. "We've got everything arranged, Mom," Tiffany continued, placing a thick, glossy folder on the polished wood between us. The sound it made, a soft, predatory "ee," was the only sound in the room. "You're going to love it at Magnolia Meadows. It has a garden and a book club." I stared at the folder. On the cover was a picture of a smiling, silver-haired couple, laughing as they played a game of checkers. It was a lie packaged in glossy paper, a prison disguised as a paradise. David Chin, a man whose quiet dignity had been a constant in my life, cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel falling, calling this twisted court to session. "Mark, Tiffany, thank you for coming." "Of course, David," Mark finally spoke, his voice all business. He still didn't look at me. He looked at the glossy brochure on the table like it was the deed to his future. Because in his mind it was, "We just want what's best for Mom. Her memory, it's not what it used to be. It's a matter of safety. A matter of his inheritance," is what he meant. The word hung in the air, unspoken but heavy as a tombstone. Tiffany pushed the file closer to my side of the table. "The paperwork is all here. We just need your signature. And we can start the transition this weekend. We've already started packing some of your things to make it easier for you." The audacity of it felt like a punch to the gut. They had been in my home, my sanctuary, touching my memories, deciding which pieces of my life were worthy of being kept, and which would be thrown away. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck, but I pushed it down, burying the rage beneath the ice. "Not yet." He finally looked at me. "My son." And what I saw in his eyes broke what was left of my heart. There was no love, no sadness, not even pity. There was only the cool, appraising glance of someone calculating the value of an old piece of furniture he was about to discard. He saw a frail old woman, problem to be managed, a signature standing between him and everything he wanted. He had no idea he was looking at the woman who held his entire world in her hands, a world that was about to come crashing down. I met his cold gaze, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. Then I leaned forward, placed my own worn hands on the table next to their glossy file, and I opened my mouth. Before the long cold winter set in, there was an endless summer. My life with Robert wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on 1,000 small moments of quiet devotion. It was in the way he'd bring me a cup of coffee in the morning, exactly how I liked it without ever having to ask. It was in the sturdy oak tree we planted in the backyard the day Mark was born, a silent testament to our growing love. This house, it's not just wood and nails. It's a living, breathing album of our lives. I can still see the faint pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen, charting Mark's height from a wobbly toddler to a young man who suddenly towered over me. I can walk into the den and almost hear the echoes of Robert's laughter as he watched old black and white movies. The worn spot on the arm of his favorite leather chair is still there. A perfect map of where his hand used to rest. Every creak in the floorboards is a familiar whisper. Every sunbeam a memory. We didn't just live here. We poured our souls into this place. When Mark told us he was getting married, Robert and I were overjoyed. We'd always wanted a daughter. The first time he brought Tiffany over for dinner, she was all smiles and compliments. "Oh, Eleanor, this house is just charming," she'd said, though her eyes scanned the wallpaper and the comfortable, well-loved furniture with a look I couldn't quite place at the time. I see it now, of course. It was the look of an appraiser, not a future daughter. I tried. Lord, how I tried. I taught her my recipe for pecan pie, the one Mark had loved since he was a boy. She'd smiled and said it was delicious, but the next time they came over, she brought a store-bought pie in a plastic box. "Just to save you the trouble, Eleanor," she'd said. It was a small thing, a silly thing, but it was the first of many. The first time I felt replaced. After Robert's funeral, the house felt cavernously empty. The silence was a physical weight. Mark was a comfort then for a time. But Tiffany was always there. A constant presence at his side, her hand on his arm, her whispers in his ear. The changes started slowly. A suggestion to hire a cleaning service because, "You shouldn't have to worry about all this dust, Mom." Then came the talk about downsizing. "This is such a big place for one person," Tiffany would say, her voice laced with concern that felt as thin as glass. "All these stairs must be terrible for your knees." My knees were fine. It wasn't my well-being she was concerned with. It was the square footage. They started talking about the house's potential. That was the word they used. Not its beauty, not its warmth, but its potential. The potential to be gutted, renovated, flipped. The potential to be erased. My life with Robert, our legacy, was just a line item on their balance sheet. Mark, my sweet boy who used to build forts out of blankets in the living room, began to look at his childhood home with his wife's cold, calculating eyes. He started seeing floor plans instead of memories. He was seeing the inheritance, not the home. I would sit in Robert's chair at night, clutching the worn leather, and I could almost feel his presence. I'd ask him, in the quiet of the empty house, what I was supposed to do. How could I fight for our home against our own son? I didn't have an answer then. I just knew that a shadow had begun to creep into every room, and I was only just beginning to realize it wasn't a passing cloud, but the start of a long, cold winter. The winter came on slowly, then all at once. It was a campaign fought in whispers and shadows, a series of small, insidious acts of psychological warfare. They were so cleverly disguised as concern that if I mentioned them, I knew I'd sound like an ungrateful, paranoid old woman. And that, I now realize, was precisely the point. The first real salvo was my grandmother's silver locket, the one I always kept on my nightstand. It held tiny faded pictures of my parents. One morning it was just gone. When I asked Tiffany if she'd seen it, she put on a pained, sorrowful expression. "Oh, Eleanor, are you sure? I saw it there just yesterday. You know," she said, patting my hand with a touch that felt like a spider. "Sometimes we misplace things when we get older. Don't you worry, it'll turn up." She said it with such gentle condescension, her voice a soft poison. The locket reappeared a week later, tucked away in the back of my jewelry box, in a velvet pouch I hadn't opened in years. Place I never would have put it. I knew then. She was testing me. She was building a case against my mind, one misplaced memory at a time. Then came the assault on my competence. Tiffany started helping me with my bills. "You have enough to worry about, Mom, let me handle these," she'd say, sweeping the mail off the counter before I could even look at it. A month later I got a call from the electric company. A stern warning about a past due notice. I was floored. I have never, in my 72 years, been late on a bill. When I confronted Tiffany, her eyes welled up with fake tears. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I thought I paid it online. See, I'm so overwhelmed trying to manage everything, I get confused too. It's just so much to keep track of." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. If she, in her prime, could get confused, then surely my aging mind was a minefield of forgotten obligations. She wasn't helping me. She was manufacturing evidence of my decline. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sharp woman in her 80s who missed nothing, was the one who confirmed I wasn't going mad. We were having our weekly tea on my porch one afternoon when Tiffany's sleek new SUV pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Gable watched her get out, a ridiculously expensive handbag swinging from her arm. "That one," Mrs. Gable said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her Earl Grey. "Her smile never quite reaches her eyes, does it, dear?" It was such a simple observation, but it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Someone else saw it. I wasn't crazy. A few days later, Mrs. Gable stopped me as I was getting the mail, her face etched with genuine concern. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low and confidential, "I don't mean to pry, but I saw a van here yesterday. A very official-looking one. Magnolia Meadows Senior Living," it said on the side. "They were here for quite a while. I hope everything is all right." My blood ran cold. A van. They weren't just making inquiries. They were getting appraisals, treating me like a piece of property to be disposed of. My future being discussed and planned by strangers on my own front lawn. I tried to sound casual, thanking her for her concern, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped a handful of letters. They were moving so much faster than I thought. The final damning proof came on a Tuesday night. I had gone to bed early, but a nagging headache kept me tossing and turning. I padded downstairs to the kitchen in my bare feet to get a glass of water. The light was on in the den, and I could hear Tiffany's voice, a low, urgent murmur that scraped against the silence of the house. I froze in the darkened hallway, my hand flat against the cool wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, of course she doesn't know," she was saying into her phone, her voice dripping with disdain. "Mark is still being sentimental. He has these flashes of guilt. But he's coming around. He sees the logic. It's a huge asset just sitting here depreciating. The lawyer said we just need to prove she can't manage on her own, that she's a danger to herself." There was a pause and then she laughed, a sound like chipping ice. "Oh, don't worry," she said to the person on the other end. "I'm collecting plenty of proof. Between the lost jewelry and the unpaid bills, it's just a matter of time. She's getting more confused every day. Honestly, it's sad." Then she said the words that would echo in my mind for days. "Once we have the power of attorney, the sale of the house will be a breeze. We'll be in by Christmas." A chill so profound it felt like it came from my very bones ran down my spine. They weren't just careless, they were plotting. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a cold, calculated conspiracy, and I was the only thing standing in their way. 2 days after I overheard that phone call, they brought the war to my front door. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a loaf of cinnamon bread, my hands moving in a rhythm I'd known for 50 years. The familiar motion was a small comfort, a connection to a life that felt increasingly hostile. The warm, sweet scent of yeast and spices filled the air, the very scent of home they were trying to steal from me. Then the doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive chime that shattered the peace. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on my apron and opened the door to find Mark and Tiffany standing on the porch. With them was another woman. She was in her 50s, with a helmet of perfectly sprayed blonde hair, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her smile was aggressively cheerful, a predatory baring of teeth. "Mom," Mark said, his eyes darting to a spot just over my shoulder. He still couldn't look at me. "This is Brenda. She's a lifestyle transition consultant. We invited her to come and have a chat." A lifestyle transition consultant? The ridiculously corporate title was almost laughable. I knew exactly what she was. Her name might as well have been the Vulture. "A chat about what, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I kept my hands, now balled into tight fists behind my back, hidden from view. Tiffany, ever the smooth operator, stepped forward, placing a cold hand on my arm. "Brenda is from Magnolia Meadows, Mom. She's just here to see the house and talk about how they can help you transition smoothly. To make sure you have everything you need for your next chapter." My next chapter. They spoke as if my current one was already over, the book slammed shut. They brought her into my home. Into Robert's home. Without so much as a word of warning. The sheer, breathtaking disrespect of it almost knocked the wind out of me. But I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the welcome mat Robert had picked out decades ago. Brenda the consultant walked into my living room as if she owned it, her eyes darting everywhere. She wasn't seeing a home filled with love and memories. She was performing an inspection, a cold assessment of liabilities. She made little check marks on her clipboard. "Oh, these beautiful area rugs are a bit of a tripping hazard, aren't they?" she chirped, her voice dripping with false sympathy. In the kitchen, she looked at my sturdy, reliable gas stove, the one I'd cooked thousands of family meals on. "We find that electric induction ranges are much safer for our residents. Less risk of fire or forgetting a burner on." Residents. She was already calling me a resident of her sterile facility. The entire time, Tiffany followed her like a vulture's shadow, pointing out flaws, with a sigh of deep, theatrical concern. "See, the stairs are so steep," she'd say, shaking her head. "I have nightmares about her falling. And the bathtub doesn't have a grab bar. I worry about her constantly." It was a performance, a disgusting, well-rehearsed play designed to paint me as a frail, incompetent creature on the verge of disaster. And I was the unwilling star. They wanted me to argue, to get flustered, to cry. They wanted me to give them the ammunition they needed. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I remained utterly, terrifyingly calm. I moved with a grace and deliberation that defied their narrative. "Would you care for some coffee, Brenda?" I asked, my voice even. "I just brewed a fresh pot." The offer threw them off. Brenda stammered for a moment before accepting. As I poured the coffee, my hand was perfectly steady. I answered her invasive questions about my health, my finances, my medication schedule, and my daily routines with simple, direct, and unshakably clear answers. The tour of humiliation continued upstairs. In my bedroom, Brenda noted the height of the bed. In the bathroom, she clucked her tongue at the tile floor. It was in the hallway that she tried her final test. She pointed to a large, framed photograph of Mark's college graduation that was hanging slightly crooked. "Oh, let me fix that for you," she said, but then feigned difficulty. "Oh dear, it seems to be stuck. My arthritis is acting up today." She looked at me expectantly. I knew what she was doing. She wanted to see me struggle, to see my hands shake. I walked over, reached up, and with a firm, steady grip, I adjusted the heavy frame until it was perfectly level. I met her eyes in the reflection in the glass. "There," I said. "All better." The tour ended back in the living room. Brenda sat on my sofa, the one where I had rocked my son to sleep, and gave me her final condescending assessment. "Well, Eleanor, you have a lovely historic home, but it does present significant challenges for someone in your stage of life. At Magnolia Meadows, you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We handle everything." I just smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you for your time, Brenda. I will certainly give your assessment the consideration it deserves." As I walked them to the door, Tiffany squeezed my arm, her nails digging in slightly, a silent, vicious punishment for my composure. "See? That wasn't so bad, was it? It's all for your own good, Mom. We just love you so much." But her eyes, her cold, triumphant eyes, told a different story. They were the eyes of a predator who had just cornered its prey. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that this prey still had teeth, and she was about to find out just how sharp they were. The performance with the consultant was the opening act. The main event, the final brutal confrontation, came a week later. They called it a family meeting. My own kitchen table, the site of countless happy birthday dinners, messy art projects, and late-night talks, was turned into a boardroom for my own eviction. The air was thick with a tension so heavy it felt like a physical presence in the room. They didn't ease into it. There were no pleasantries. They sat me down as if I were a child about to be disciplined. Mark, finally finding some semblance of a spine made of Tiffany's steel, not his own, was the one to speak. She sat beside him, her hand on his, a puppeteer steadying her marionette for the final gut-wrenching scene. "Mom," he began, his voice strained and unnaturally formal. "Tiffany and I have been talking. A lot. We've come to a decision, and we feel it's important that we are all on the same page." He slid a stack of those glossy Magnolia Meadows brochures across the table. They landed next to the salt shaker with a soft, final thud that sounded, to my ears, like a shovelful of dirt on a coffin. "We've sold our apartment," he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would lessen their impact. "The market is great right now. We got a fantastic offer. Just makes financial sense. We're going to move in here." I stared at him, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly roaring in my ears. The room felt very cold. "Move in here," I repeated, my own voice sounding distant and faint. "Yes." Tiffany jumped in, unable to let him handle it alone, her voice a sharp, intrusive blade. "To take care of you, of course. To be here for you. And frankly, to begin updating the place. It needs a lot of work to make it safe for you. And of course, to improve its resale value for the future." There it was again. Value. Not love. Not memory. Not home. Value. A cold, hard number on a spreadsheet. "While the renovations are happening," Mark continued, his eyes now fixed on a spot on the wall just behind my head, "it would be chaotic and unsafe. It would be best for you to be somewhere comfortable, somewhere secure. We've already gone ahead and put a deposit down on a lovely corner suite for you at Magnolia Meadows. It has a view of the garden." A deposit? They had put a deposit down on my cage. The finality of it, the absolute certainty they had in their victory, was staggering. They hadn't asked me, they had told me. They had signed my life away in a transaction I had no part in. My entire world, my home, my independence, my memories, all decided by them for them. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like the floor had fallen away beneath me, leaving me suspended in a cold, airless void. "This is what's happening, Mom," Mark said, and now his voice hardened, finally shedding the last flimsy shreds of feigned concern. It was the voice of a businessman closing a difficult deal. "This is the best solution for everyone. It's logical. It's practical. Best for them," he meant. Best for their bank account. Best for their 5-year plan. I was just an obstacle. A stubborn piece of old furniture that needed to be cleared out before the real work could begin. I was the unfortunate, sentimental cost of doing business. The pain was a physical thing. A white-hot poker searing through my chest. This was my son. My only child. The boy I had held in my arms on the day he was born. And he was looking at me as if I were a stranger. A nuisance he was legally obligated to deal with. If you have ever felt utterly and completely betrayed by the very people you are supposed to trust with your life, the people you brought into this world and nurtured with every fiber of your being, then you know the crushing weight I felt in that moment. You know what it's like to have the air stolen from your lungs by the hands you once taught to clap. Keep listening to see how I found the strength to breathe again. I looked from my son's cold, determined face to my daughter-in-law's triumphant smirk. She was practically vibrating with victory. They sat there, a united front of greed and disrespect, waiting for me to break down, to cry, to argue, to finally surrender to the inevitable. They expected tears. They expected a futile, angry fight. They expected the predictable reactions of a heartbroken, powerless old woman. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over. But they had made a fatal, arrogant miscalculation. They had completely and utterly forgotten about Robert. They had forgotten about the promises he made to me, and the lengths he would go to, even from beyond the grave, to protect his wife. And they had grossly underestimated the quiet, righteous fury of a mother who was about to call in her husband's last and most powerful favor. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, steady and strong. The tears they expected never came. Instead, a cold, hard calm settled over me. It was time. They left me sitting at the kitchen table with their glossy lies and their broken promises. For a long, long time I didn't move. The house was silent, but my mind was a screaming chaos of betrayal and grief. The weight of their ultimatum was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious, painful effort. This was my lowest point. The moment I truly felt alone, a ghost in my own home, a footnote in my own life story about to be erased. Finally, I pushed myself up from the table, my joints aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with my 72 years. It was the weariness of a broken heart. I walked almost in a trance through the rooms of my life. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool back of the living room sofa where I had read countless bedtime stories to a little boy with sandy brown hair. I paused in the hallway and touched the faded wallpaper, a pattern of climbing roses Robert and I had picked out together one sunny Saturday afternoon. I was saying goodbye. I was a tourist visiting the museum of my own life, just before it was scheduled for demolition. My feet carried me, as they always did when I was lost, to Robert's study. His sanctuary. Nothing had been changed in here since he passed. His books still lined the shelves in a state of organized chaos, His reading glasses were still on the desk next to a well-worn copy of a presidential biography, and his favorite leather chair still held the faint, comforting scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice. I sank into that chair, the worn leather cool against my skin, and I finally let the tears come. Not the angry, hot tears I had been holding back at the kitchen table, but a flood of pure, unadulterated grief. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for my husband, for his warmth, his wisdom, his unwavering love that had been my anchor for nearly 50 years. I cried for the son I had lost, not to death, but to something far crueler, to the slow creeping poison of greed. I cried for the home we had built, not with just wood and nails, but with laughter and tears and promises, now under siege from within. I picked up the silver-framed photograph on his desk, Robert and I on our wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful, the whole world ahead of us, never imagining a day like this could ever come. "Oh, Robert," I whispered to the empty room, my voice thick with tears. "What do I do? What would you do? You're supposed to be here." I sat there for what felt like hours, letting the grief wash over me, until there were no tears left. There was only a hollow, aching emptiness. And then something else began to stir in the darkness. A tiny hard ember of anger. An anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. An anger I had suppressed in the name of family peace. It was the anger of a woman who had been pushed too far. The anger of a wife who would not, could not, let her husband's legacy be dismantled and sold off for kitchen renovations and a new SUV. My gaze, clear now, drifted to the heavy oak desk. To the bottom right drawer. It was the only one that was ever kept locked. Robert had given me the key, a small ornate brass key, on a simple silver chain right after his final diagnosis. He pressed it into my palm, his own hand frail but his grip surprisingly firm. "You'll know when you need this, Ellie," he had said. His voice weak but his eyes as clear and firm as I'd ever seen them. "I pray to God you never do. But if you do, everything you need is in here. My final promise to you." My hand trembled as I fished the chain from around my neck, where I had worn it every day since his funeral, a secret talisman against my skin. The key felt cool and solid in my palm. I knelt down by the desk, my knees protesting, and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, decisive click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I pulled the drawer open. Inside there was no money, no hidden jewels. There was only a single, thick, leather-bound binder. It was a deep navy blue, and on the spine, in simple, elegant gold leaf, were 4 words that would change everything. The Vance Family Trust. I lifted it out. It was heavy, solid, real. A testament to a husband's love and foresight. It wasn't dusty. It was a weapon, cared for and waiting patiently to be used. I carried it back to the desk and opened it, the pages making a crisp, authoritative sound that cut through the silence. Tears streamed down my face again, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of resolve, a fury, of a love that death itself could not break. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten who my husband was. And with this book in my hands, it was time to give them a lesson in family history they would never, ever forget. That navy blue leather-bound binder wasn't just a collection of legal documents. It was Robert's final love letter to me. A masterpiece of planning born from a lifetime of quiet observation and a deep protective love. As I turned the heavy cream-colored pages, each one filled with dense, carefully worded paragraphs, I could almost hear his voice, calm and reassuring, explaining everything. This wasn't some last-minute, hastily written will. This was a fortress, and he had spent years designing it, brick by legal brick, around me. Robert came from a family that had seen the ugly, corrosive side of inheritance disputes. His own grandmother, a sweet, trusting woman named Clara, had been swindled out of her family farm in rural Georgia by a greedy nephew after her husband died. The story was a dark legend in our family, a cautionary tale that had haunted Robert his entire life. He told me how the nephew had shown up with a lawyer and a stack of papers, convincing the grieving widow that signing them was just a formality to settle the estate. She signed, and in doing so, signed away the land her family had worked for generations. They put her in a small state-run home, and she died a year later, heartbroken and bewildered. Robert saw how grief could make a person vulnerable, and how the promise of a big inheritance could turn family into predators. "Blood is thicker than water, Ellie," he used to say. his jaw tight with the memory. But sometimes the rustle of a stock certificate is louder than a heartbeat. So, years ago, working quietly and meticulously with David Chan, he had created the Vance Family Trust. It was an ironclad, irrevocable trust, a separate legal entity designed to be untouchable. He didn't just write a simple will that could be contested and picked apart by hungry lawyers. He built a vault. He had systematically transferred ownership of everything we owned. This house, the savings accounts, the modest but steady investment portfolio, even the cars, into the trust. It wasn't my house. It wasn't Mark's future house. It belonged legally and unequivocally to the trust. The fortress. I kept reading, my fingers tracing the carefully typed lines, the legal jargon slowly becoming clear. The structure was brilliant in its simplicity and its absolute power. Robert had named himself the primary trustee, and upon his death, that role passed automatically, seamlessly, and solely to me. I was named the lifetime trustee. Not a co-trustee with Mark. Not an executor with limited powers. The sole undisputed trustee. The document granted me complete and total control over every single asset in the trust for as long as I lived. I could sell property, move money, liquidate stocks, make investments. Anything I deemed necessary for my own care, comfort, and well-being. The language was broad and powerful. And Mark? Mark was named as the beneficiary. That was the key word. A beneficiary, not an owner. His role was conditional, a passenger in a car that I was driving. He would inherit what was left of the trust's assets only after my passing. The simple will that he and Tiffany were so eager to see executed was just a sideshow, a document directing who would get my personal effects, my jewelry, my books, my clothes. The real power, the real wealth, the keys to the kingdom were locked away in here. He had received a summary of the trust's existence after Robert's death, a document he had clearly never bothered to read in detail. He just saw the word beneficiary, and assumed everything would automatically be his one day. He assumed wrong. Then, tucked between 2 pages, I found it. A single folded sheet of Robert's personal stationery. It was a handwritten note. My breath caught in my throat. "My dearest Ellie," it began in his familiar, strong script. "If you are reading this, it means the day I dreaded has come to pass. I am so sorry. I am sorry that I am not there to stand beside you, and I am sorry that you have been forced to open this drawer. I hope Mark has grown into the man we raised him to be. But I have seen the way that girl looks at him and the way he looks at her. I have seen his weakness for a pretty face and a persuasive argument. I have built you a fortress, my love. But even the strongest walls need a sword to defend them. Look at Section 8, Article C. David calls it our secret weapon. I call it my promise to you. Use it. Do not hesitate. Your peace and your dignity are the only inheritance that truly matters. I love you always. Yours, Robert." Tears blurred the words. I folded the note carefully and placed it over my heart. Then, with shaking hands, I turned to Section 8, Article C. The title, in stark, bold letters, jumped off the page. The Matriarch's Prerogative. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing, clear as a bell and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. It stated that as the lifetime trustee, I had the absolute, non-negotiable right to the quiet enjoyment of the primary residence, this house, free from any interference, coercion, pressure, or distress caused by any named beneficiary. It went on to state that any action by a beneficiary that caused the trustee emotional or financial distress, sought to remove the trustee from the residence against her will, or attempted to usurp the trustee's authority over the trust's assets, was considered a material breach of fiduciary duty. And the consequences for such a breach were devastatingly clear. At my sole discretion, I had the power to invoke the penalty clause. I could immediately suspend all future financial distributions to the beneficiary. I could reduce their final inheritance by any percentage I saw fit. And in an extreme case of malicious intent, I had the authority to petition the court, with the trust's full legal and financial backing, to have the beneficiary completely and permanently disinherited. My finger traced the words, "At my sole discretion." It wasn't a loophole. It was a nuclear bomb. Robert hadn't just built me a fortress. He had handed me the launch codes. It was his final, most powerful gift to me. A weapon he hoped with all his heart that I would never ever have to use. But he had made damn sure it was there, just in case the wolves came to the door dressed as our own family. With the heavy binder open on the desk in front of me and Robert's handwritten letter held tightly in my hand, a newfound strength flowed through my veins. The grief and helplessness that had paralyzed me were burned away by a clean, white-hot resolve. The trembling in my hands was gone, replaced by a steady, cold purpose. I reached for the phone, my movements deliberate and sure. I knew the number by heart. It had been a lifeline for our family for decades. The phone rang twice before a familiar, calm voice answered. David Chun. David, I said, and I was surprised by how strong and clear my own voice sounded. There was no quaver, no hint of tears. It was the voice of a woman in charge. It's Eleanor Vance. Eleanor. It's good to hear from you, he said warmly. Then his tone shifted, becoming more cautious. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. I received a rather insistent call from Mark's new lawyer this morning. A fellow named Peterson. He was asking about the timeline for executing Robert's will and the probate process. He seemed to be under the impression it was a simple matter. There was a note of distinct displeasure in David's voice. He was too professional to gossip, but I knew he understood exactly what was happening. That's why I'm calling, David, I said, looking down at the open page of the trust, at the bold heading of Article C. They've done more than ask about the will. They are trying to force me into a nursing home. They've made a deposit. They intend to sell this house. The silence on the other end of the line was profound and heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind, connecting the dots, the aggressive lawyer, the sudden rush. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all of its pleasantries. It was the voice of a lawyer ready for battle, a protector awakening. Tell me everything, Eleanor. From the very beginning. Do not leave out a single detail. And so I did. I started with the misplaced locket and the unpaid bill. I told him about the subtle campaign of gaslighting, the constant suggestions that my mind was failing. I told him about Mrs. Gable seeing the Magnolia Meadows van, a detail that made him utter a sharp, angry sound. I described, in painstaking detail, the humiliating visit from Brenda the consultant, her condescending questions, and Tiffany's poisonous commentary. And finally, I told him about the ultimatum at the kitchen table, about the deposit they had already placed on a room for me, sealing my fate without my consent. I spoke calmly, laying out the facts one by one, like a witness presenting irrefutable evidence to a judge. With each detail, I could feel the anger building on the other end of the line. It wasn't my raw, emotional anger. It was a cold, precise legal fury. It was the anger of a man who had not only lost a client in Robert, but a dear friend, and he was seeing that friend's greatest fear come to life. They brought a so-called consultant into Robert's house? He finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, each word clipped. Into the primary residence of the trust, to assess the trustee, without your permission or the counsel of this office? Yes, I replied. That is exactly what they did. I see. He was silent for another moment, and I knew he was pacing his office. Eleanor, go to Robert's desk. The bottom right drawer. There is a blue leather binder. I'm already here, David, I said, a small grim smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. The trust document is open in front of me. Robert left me a note. I'm looking at Section 8, Article C. A low whistle came through the phone, followed by a sound that might have been a dark chuckle. The matriarch's prerogative, he said, a note of deep, profound respect in his voice. Robert and I spent 3 months perfecting the language on that clause. He called it his peace of mind clause. I've never had a client so adamant about a single provision. He knew. He always worried Mark was too easily influenced, too eager to please that woman. He was right, David, I said softly. He was right about everything. So what do you want to do, Eleanor? David asked, his voice now firm, all business, the strategist taking over. You are holding all the cards. I want to be very clear about that. This is not a negotiation. You hold all the power here. I do, I said, my gaze falling on the photograph of Robert and me, so young and hopeful. I was doing this for him as much as for myself. I want to call a meeting. A formal meeting in your office. Not a family chat. A legal proceeding. Not about my health. Not about nursing homes. I want a formal reading of the key provisions of the Vance Family Trust. I want Mark and Tiffany there. I want their lawyer there. I want them to understand the foundation this family was built on, and the sacred rules they have so carelessly broken. Consider it done, David said without a moment's hesitation, his voice ringing with conviction. I will draft the notices immediately and have them sent by courier. They'll be legally binding summons. Their attendance will not be optional. How does Friday morning at 10 o'clock sound? Friday sounds perfect, I said. It gives them 2 days to wonder what's coming. Eleanor, David added just before we hung up, his voice softening for a moment. I am so deeply sorry you have to go through this. But I have to tell you, Robert would be so damn proud of you right now. I hung up the phone, a strange, profound calm washing over me. The first chess piece had been moved across the board. The game had finally truly begun. And I knew with every fiber of my being exactly how it was going to end. The official notice from the law offices of Chun and Associates arrived the next day by a stern-faced courier who required a signature. It wasn't a polite letter or a gentle request. It was a legal summons, printed on heavy, intimidating cream-colored paper. You are hereby required, it began, to attend a mandatory meeting regarding the administration, bylaws and fiduciary duties pertaining to the Vance Family Trust. The effect on the atmosphere in the house was immediate and seismic. The smug certainty that had surrounded Mark and Tiffany for weeks evaporated like mist on a hot morning, replaced by a frantic, confused and angry energy. I was in the kitchen, calmly wiping down the counters, when Mark stormed in, waving the letter in his hand as if it were on fire. Tiffany was right behind him, her perfectly made-up face pale and tight with anxiety. What is this? He demanded, throwing the letter onto the clean granite counter. The sound was offensively loud in the quiet kitchen. What the hell is the Vance Family Trust? I thought everything was in the will. What are you doing? What trick are you trying to pull? I turned from the counter, drying my hands slowly on a dish towel, meeting his panicked gaze without flinching. We will discuss it on Friday at the lawyer's office, I said, my voice even and calm. The contrast to his frantic energy seemed to infuriate him even more. Just as the letter says. I don't understand, he sputtered, his voice rising. Why are you doing this? We're trying to help you. We're trying to secure your future. Are you, Mark? I asked, my voice dropping a little lower, carrying a weight that made him take an involuntary step back. Are you really? Or are you trying to secure yours? He couldn't hold my gaze. He looked away, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. This is ridiculous. It's hostile. I'm calling Peterson. You should do that, I said, turning my back on him to put the dish towel away. I'm sure your lawyer will advise you to attend. The next 48 hours were some of the longest and strangest of my life. The house, which had already felt cold and alien, became a pressure cooker of tension and suspicion. They moved around me like ghosts with unfinished business, speaking in hushed, angry whispers whenever I entered a room. The silence would fall, and I would be met with hostile glares. I could hear Tiffany on the phone constantly, her voice a sharp, panicked staccato, pacing back and forth in their guest room. What do you mean you can't get a copy before the meeting? I heard her hiss into her phone, the sound carrying down the hallway. It's his father's trust. He's the beneficiary. No, he never mentioned the details, he just said his mother was taken care of. Look, just find out what it is. Find out what she can do. I, on the other hand, found a strange, profound peace. I spent the time preparing not by calling lawyers, but by reaffirming my connection to the life they were trying to erase. I went through old photo albums, my fingers tracing the smiling faces of a family that once was, reminding myself of the love that had built this home. I sat for hours in Robert's study, the heavy trust binder open on the desk, reading and rereading the clauses. I wasn't memorizing them. I was absorbing them, feeling the strength of my husband's love and foresight infusing me with a courage I hadn't felt in years. On Thursday afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag. It was not for Magnolia Meadows. It was a symbolic act, a declaration of intent. I packed a change of clothes, my toiletries, my favorite novel, and the silver-framed photo of Robert from the study. I was preparing for a new beginning, a reclaiming of my own home and my own life. I was drawing a line in the sand, and I knew which side I was on. That night, Tiffany tried a new tactic. She found me in the living room where I was quietly reading. She sat on the ottoman in front of my chair, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I suspected she'd used a bit of menthol to achieve the effect. "Eleanor," she began, her voice a soft, trembling whisper. "Can we just talk? This has all gotten so ugly. This legal stuff, it's tearing Mark apart. He loves you so much. We both do. Can't you just trust us? Can't you see we are just trying to do what's best?" It was a masterful performance. The concerned daughter-in-law, heartbroken by this sudden, inexplicable hostility. A year ago it might have worked. But I had heard her voice on the phone. I had seen her eyes gleam with triumph. I just looked at her over the top of my reading glasses. "There is nothing to talk about, Tiffany," I said calmly. "We will have our conversation tomorrow in a professional setting with counsel present." Her face hardened for a split second, the mask slipping, revealing the cold fury beneath, before she recomposed it into a mask of hurt. She stood up and left without another word. Later, just before I went to bed, Mark confronted me in the hallway. He looked terrible. He was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept. He blocked my path to my bedroom. "Mom, just tell me what this is about," he pleaded, his voice losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. "Please. You're scaring me. Tiffany thinks you're trying to, I don't know, cut us out of the will completely. Is that it? Is this about money?" I stopped and looked at my son, at the man he had become. A man so consumed by money that he couldn't imagine any other motivation. The fear in his eyes wasn't for me, for our relationship, for the family he was destroying. It was for his precious inheritance. And in that moment, any lingering doubt I had about what I had to do vanished. "This is about respect, Mark," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "Something your father valued above all else. We have nothing more to discuss until we are in David's office. You wanted a meeting to decide my future. Now you have one." I walked past him, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit hallway. The look on his face told me he was starting to understand that he was not the one in control. Not anymore. He should be scared. He had absolutely no idea how much he had to lose. When I opened my mouth in the heavy silence of David Chen's office, the first words I spoke were not words of anger or accusation. They were quiet, clear and steady, cutting through the thick tension like a scalpel. "David," I said, my eyes locked on my son, refusing to acknowledge the woman beside him. "I believe we are here today to clarify some profound misunderstandings regarding my living situation and the administration of my late husband's estate." Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. Tiffany shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom, her mask of civility completely gone now that we were behind closed doors. Her lawyer, Peterson, a slick-looking man with a cheap suit and shifty eyes, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Vance," Peterson began, "my clients have been acting with your best interests at heart. Their only concern is your safety and well-being. This meeting feels rather adversarial." David Chun leaned forward, a dangerous glint in his eyes. He gestured to the glossy Magnolia Meadows folder they had so proudly placed on the table, as if it were a piece of damning evidence, which it was. "Before we discuss this proposal," he said, his voice filling the room with an authority they could not challenge, "it is legally necessary to review the primary document that governs all Vance family assets. I'm not referring to the will. I am referring to the legally binding instrument known as the Vance Family Trust, established by Robert Vance 20 years ago." He opened the heavy, leather-bound binder that I had brought with me, its twin sitting on his own desk. Mark and Tiffany exchanged a nervous, confused glance. Peterson's smug expression faltered for the first time. This was not going according to their plan. "The will, as you know, Mark," David continued, his voice a calm, methodical drone that began to chip away at their arrogance word by word, "covers personal effects and final wishes. But the house, the savings, the investment portfolio, all substantial assets were transferred into the trust decades ago. They are not part of a conventional probate inheritance." Peterson shifted in his seat. "My client is the sole heir. He is the named beneficiary." "He is indeed the named beneficiary," David agreed smoothly. "But it seems neither you nor your client have taken the time to read the full terms of what being a beneficiary, to this particular trust actually entails. David put on his reading glasses and began to read, his voice clear and unwavering. He read the clause that established the trust's sole and absolute ownership of all property. He read the clause that named me, Eleanor Vance, as the sole lifetime trustee, with complete and autonomous control over every penny, every stock, every brick of the house. With every sentence, the color drained from Tiffany's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. Mark sank lower in his chair, his confident posture collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. "And now," David said, pausing for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words settle into the suffocating silence of the room, "we come to a specific provision that Robert was most insistent upon. I believe he referred to it as his peace of mind clause. It is Section 8, Article C, entitled, The Matriarch's Prerogative." He let the title hang in the air for a moment before continuing, his eyes scanning the shocked faces before him. "This article grants the lifetime trustee," he looked pointedly at me, "the absolute, non-negotiable right to the quiet enjoyment of the primary residence, free from any interference, coercion, pressure, or distress caused by any named beneficiary." He looked up, over the rim of his glasses, directly at Mark. "It goes on to state, and I quote, any action by a beneficiary, direct or indirect, that seeks to remove the trustee from the residence against her will, attempts to usurp the trustee's authority over the trust's assets, or causes demonstrable emotional or financial distress through a campaign of manipulation or intimidation, is considered a material breach of fiduciary duty." Tiffany let out a small strangled gasp, a sound like a wounded animal. Peterson's jaw was slack. David wasn't finished. He was saving the best for last. He continued, his voice hardening into granite. "The consequences for such a breach are, and I quote from the document, immediate and severe. The clause grants the trustee, at her sole discretion," he emphasized the words, making them sound like a judge's sentence, "the power to immediately suspend all financial support and distributions to the breaching beneficiary, to significantly alter the terms of the final inheritance by any percentage she sees fit, and to petition the court for the beneficiary's complete and total disinheritance from this trust." The room was utterly silent, save for Tiffany's sharp, ragged breathing. David Chun took off his glasses slowly and deliberately. He looked at the glossy brochure for the nursing home, then at my son's ashen, horror-struck face, and finally at me. "Therefore," David concluded, his voice like the crack of a whip, "this proposal to move Eleanor into an assisted living facility, the hiring of an unlicensed consultant to assess her in her own home without her consent, the attempts to interfere with her mail and finances, and the general campaign of psychological pressure, are not just unkind, unethical, or immoral. They are a direct, legally documented violation of the trust your father created to protect your mother, with the most severe and financially devastating consequences." He closed the binder with a soft, final deafening thud. Checkmate. The silence that followed David's final word was absolute. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shattered arrogance and dawning horror. Mark stared at the polished surface of the table as if it were a deep abyss that had just opened up at his feet, ready to swallow him whole. Tiffany's face was a mask of disbelief, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish and clownish against her ghostly pale skin. Her lawyer, Peterson, was shuffling his papers, avoiding eye contact with anyone, a mercenary who had just realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. Then it was my turn to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. In the ringing silence, my quiet words carried more weight than any scream ever could. "I am so deeply, profoundly disappointed in you, Mark." I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the roiling sea of emotions inside me. I spoke only to him, as if Tiffany and her lawyer were just furniture in the room. "I am not disappointed because of the greed. Greed is a simple, ugly thing. I am disappointed because of the weakness, the cowardice. You let her." I nodded briefly toward Tiffany, not even gracing her with a direct look. "Whisper poison into your ear until you forgot who you were. You let her convince you to trade your mother's unconditional love and your father's sacred legacy for a renovated kitchen and a bigger number in your bank account." I slowly, deliberately, slid the Magnolia Meadows brochure back across the table toward them. It stopped right in front of Mark. "My future is not up for discussion. It never was. But yours," I said, my eyes boring into his, is very much on the table. Tiffany finally found her voice, a shrill, ugly sound that tore through the quiet room. You can't do this. This is entrapment. This is illegal. Mark is his son. He is entitled to his inheritance. We'll sue you. We'll sue the trust. He is entitled to nothing, David Chun interjected, his voice like ice, cutting her off mid-shriek. He is a conditional beneficiary, a fact your lawyer should have explained to you, and he has spectacularly, and with witnesses, failed to meet the conditions. As for suing the trust, David allowed a small cold smile to touch his lips. Be my guest. The trust will be more than happy to fund your mother's legal defense against you with your own inheritance money. We can drag this out for years. I assure you we have deeper pockets. Peterson put a hand on Tiffany's arm, murmuring for her to be quiet, but she shook him off. I ignored her completely. My business was with my son. Here is what is going to happen, I said, laying out my terms like stones on a path, each one heavy and immovable. You and Tiffany will go back to the house. You will pack your personal belongings. I want you gone by sundown. You will give me the key you had made, and you will leave the garage door opener on the counter. You will not contact me directly. Any and all communication will go through David's office. Is that clear? Mark finally looked up, his eyes wide with a terror that was finally blessedly real. Mom, where are we supposed to go? We sold our apartment. We don't have anywhere to live. That sounds like a personal problem, not a legal one, I replied, the words colder than I ever thought I could be. My heart ached to say them, but it was a necessary surgery. You made your decision to burn your own safety net. Now you can live with the consequences. I wasn't finished. I am not a monster, Mark. Despite your best efforts to treat me like one, I am still your mother. I will not see you on the street. Robert would not want that. So, invoking my discretionary powers as trustee, I will grant you a small monthly allowance. It will be enough for a modest, one-bedroom apartment and groceries. It will be directly deposited into a new bank account that must be under your name only. This allowance is conditional. The first condition is that you seek professional therapy for your choices and your susceptibility to undue influence. David will require proof of your attendance. The second condition is that you have no contact with me for 6 months. And the house, he whispered, his voice cracking, the question he really wanted to ask finally emerging. The rest of the inheritance? The house is my home until the day I die, I said firmly, my voice ringing with an authority he had never heard from me before. It will never be yours. As for your final inheritance, the capital in the trust, we will revisit that question in 1 year. It will depend entirely on your actions, your demonstrated remorse, and your willingness to become the man your father always hoped you would be. It is no longer a guarantee. It is something you must earn back. I finally turned my gaze to Tiffany. As for you, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word was laced with steel. You will receive nothing. Not a single cent. Not now, not ever. The trust has provisions against beneficiaries whose partners act with malicious intent. You are the poison, and I am the antidote. That's when she broke. You old witch, she shrieked, jumping to her feet, her face a contorted mask of pure, unfiltered rage. You think you can just sit on all that money alone? You'll die, Anne. That's enough, David said, his voice a thunderclap that made her physically recoil. He stood up, towering over them. This meeting is over. Mr. Peterson, I suggest you get your client out of my office before she does any more irreparable damage to her husband's already precarious financial future. Tiffany stared at me, her chest heaving, but seeing no support from her defeated husband or her useless lawyer, she grabbed her ridiculously expensive purse and stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard a picture on the wall rattled. Mark just sat there, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. After a long moment, he looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and shame and utter devastation. Mom, he whispered, the sound broken and raw. I am so sorry. The words I had longed to hear for months, the words I thought would heal everything. But now that they were here, they felt like ashes in my mouth, too little and far too late. Some things, once broken, can never be put back together in the same way. The question was, where on earth do we go from here? They were gone by sunset, just as I had demanded. I stood at the living room window, partially hidden by the lace curtains, and watched their SUV, loaded with boxes and suitcases, pull out of the driveway. Tiffany was in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her jaw set like concrete. Mark paused at the end of the drive, his brake lights glowing red for a long moment, as if he wanted to look back. But he never did. He just turned the corner and they were gone. I didn't feel the rush of triumphant victory I had expected. I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt quiet. The house was quiet too. But it was a different kind of quiet now. For months it had been the silence of tension, of unspoken resentments and simmering plots. Now it was the silence of peace, of sanctuary reclaimed. I walked through the rooms and it felt like the house itself took a deep, cleansing breath, exhaling the toxic presence that had been suffocating it. The days that followed were about the slow, deliberate act of rediscovering my own home. I moved my grandmother's silver locket back to its rightful place on my nightstand, and held it in my hand before I went to sleep each night. I brewed coffee in the mornings and sat on the back porch, listening to the chirping of the cardinals, with no one to tell me the caffeine was bad for my heart or that I shouldn't be sitting outside in the damp air. The simple act of making my own decisions, big and small, felt like a radical act of freedom. Mrs. Gable came over the next day, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She didn't bring a pie. She brought a bottle of surprisingly good champagne. She didn't ask what had happened. She just said, "I noticed the weather forecast has improved dramatically." We sat at my kitchen table, the one where my fate was supposed to have been sealed, and we toasted. To resilience. To good neighbors. And to husbands who are smart enough to hire good lawyers. For the first time in months, the kitchen was filled with genuine, unburdened laughter. I knew I needed more than just peace. I needed a purpose that was my own. Remembering the profound isolation I had felt, believing my friends' calls weren't being passed on, I decided to do something about it. I used a small discretionary fund from the trust, an action Robert would have applauded, and started a community garden club for the seniors in our neighborhood. I got permission from the town to use an unused weed-choked patch of land at the local park. We tilled the soil, built raised beds, and planted seeds. My hands were always in the dirt now, coaxing new life from the earth. We grew tomatoes, roses, friendships, and a powerful network of support. We were planting, not just waiting to be harvested. My relationship with Mark is a work in progress. It is a fragile, tender thing. He calls me every Sunday afternoon, exactly at 2 o'clock. The conversations are often stilted and awkward, filled with long pauses. We talk about the weather. He tells me about his therapy sessions, about the difficult work he is doing to understand his own weakness and motivations. He and Tiffany are in the middle of a very ugly divorce. Her greed, it turned out, did not extend to standing by a man with a reduced allowance and a suspended, and now significantly smaller, inheritance. He is living in a small, clean apartment across town, and working a modest job in logistics. He is humbled. I can hear it in his voice. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a deep, painful humility. Last week, he asked a question that made my heart stop for a second. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "the leaves from the oak tree are starting to come down. I was wondering, if you'd let me, I could come over on Saturday and rake them for you, like I used to." I hesitated for a long moment, my mind flashing back to the cold, calculating look in his eyes in the lawyer's office. The wound was still there, a tender scar on my heart. But a scar is a sign of healing, not of a perpetual wound. "Okay, Mark," I said softly. "You can come on Saturday." Forgiveness is not a single act, a switch that can be flipped. It is a long, difficult road walked one tentative step at a time. I don't know if we will ever get back to the easy, trusting relationship we once had. Perhaps we aren't meant to. Perhaps we are meant to build something new. Something more honest, forged in the fires of a terrible mistake and a mother's enduring, if now more cautious, love. I still sit in Robert's chair every evening, the leather worn smooth by the years. I don't ask him for guidance anymore. I just look at his picture and I thank him. I thank him for his love, for his foresight, and for giving me the tools I needed to find my own strength, a strength I never knew I possessed. He built this house with wood and nails, but he fortified it with love and respect. My son and his wife saw only the market value, the brick and mortar, the potential for profit. They never understood that a home's true foundation is made of something far stronger, something that can't be bought or sold. They forgot that you cannot put a price tag on a lifetime of dignity, and you cannot steal a legacy from a woman who refuses to let it go. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I truly hope it can help someone else out there who feels voiceless or overlooked. My question for you all is, what's one piece of advice your parents or grandparents gave you that has stuck with you your entire life? I'd love to read your answers in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more stories of strength and redemption. Remember, you are not alone.